Hey y'all, welcome to AllieCat Customs. Today I'm doing a review on a set of Proform wireless digital scales. And if you want to know how much this Trans Am weighs, stay tuned and you'll find out. All right, y'all, so I'm super excited about this. And as anybody knows that's trying to build a drag racing car or any type of performance cars, you know how important and critical knowing what your corner weights are and scaling a car out so that you can maximize all the performance of your suspension. And anybody that knows how expensive they can be. And just like me, for years I struggled with having to borrow scales from somebody or trying to rent scales from people and all that kind of stuff. And it's just always been a nightmare. So I finally stepped up my tuning game so I could buy myself a set of scales here so I could use them on really fast cars like that bad little Trans Am over my shoulder right here. So I'm about to test these scales out, and these are a Proform, the part number is 67644, and they are a wireless four-corner scale system. So I'm about to unbox them and get these checked out. And I also, while I was buying the scales, I bought a set of levels so that you could level out all four scales so you can get a more accurate reading as you're using your scales. So let me get both of these unboxed. I'm gonna start with the scales, check these out, and then we'll check out this level system. And we're about to scale this Trans Am out here. So let's dive in. Alrighty, let's get I'm gonna open this box first. So I'm setting this out of the way. We'll deal with that later. I'm gonna get this box open. I love how it says delicate instruments handled with care, and then the box is torn where it looks like somebody drop kicked it or something. This might be interesting. So, get her unboxed. Geez, could I have a performance dull knife? Let's see. The top here we have paperwork. Pad. Then comes with a carrying case. Let's see. What's this? Proform. Parts magazine. Alrighty. What else is in this box? Nothing. Nope. Ta-da. New trash box. The scales are on rollers. What's it? Oh, it's got two rollers. Rollers and stop. Like a suitcase. And it has a that is nice. But I say this is a short guy approved carrying case. But there we go, and it goes low enough that we can open the carrying case. And let's see, we have the control box. It's got a kind of like a rubberized coating on the outside so it don't slide so bad. I stand corrected. Slides pretty well on the table. Pad, we have the scales in line. I've got the batteries for it. In the case, have a USB cord, some packing silica. So that's all the batteries for the scales and for the programmer, the control box. There we go. Wow. Pretty decent, like, they're decently weighted. I like that. And you see it's got the scale pad's got 4 buttons for the scales to read, and then has battery pack, control box, and it says on it, it's got a left front. So you have on all of them the different scales. You have left front, left rear, right rear. So it's a nice metal pad on it. And they are the kind that you can drive on. They have a nice shape to them to where you could drive on them. And I saw, I did watch some reviews on these, and it seemed everybody that was saying that these are drive-on scales, but they didn't want to drive on them, so they parked the car on, set the car down on the scales, which that's not the right way to weigh your car. You want to drive them onto the scales so the suspension is settled. But I was concerned when I saw these scales that there would be a tip, and that's what I don't like. Even though they are drive-on scales, if you just drove straight on them, you could pop them up and slam down on the thing. That's not good. So what I would do to alleviate that is put like a board here instead of trying to hit this edge of the scale. I would still put a board here and then drive from the board onto the scales. I think that would solve it. You definitely want to drive onto the scales to have your suspension loaded. So let's take a look at the rest of them. So we got left front, right front. All good so far. And right rear. So we have them. Carrying case. Pack's been pretty tight. I mean, you can literally, you can use this to travel. Take your scales with you to the racetrack, stuff like that. It's pretty solid carrying case. Put your spare batteries in the top. The controller goes up here, but apparently the controller doesn't like to stay up there because gravity is the only thing holding it in there, or not gravity, but the squish of the foam and the vibration and bouncing and stuff. It'll fall out of place. But it all looks good. I'm going to get the batteries put in all this and test it out, and we'll see how it works. I can hear my buddy showing up, so we can get started on scaling the car right now. So we'll get this everything done, and we'll see you in just a minute. All right, y'all, so this is not exactly the correct way to weigh your car, setting it straight down on the scales. Every time I saw a review on these scales, being drive-on scales, people kept jacking the car up, setting it down, and then several people say that the weight was creeping up on them. And the reason being is because the suspension is settling and forcing onto the scales funny, and that could be the cause. So I'm gonna test this theory out. We're gonna set it down on the scales like this, and then later when we're actually doing the chassis work and setting the car up, we're gonna drive it on the scales. We're gonna roll it on the scales the way you're supposed to and test how the scales react when you do it that way versus this way. But James is extremely excited to know how much his car weighs. So we have a wager, and you say your scales, you're saying?
I'll say 3,300.
You say 3,300?
3,300.
I say 32. Chandler said 3,050, but before he thought about it having a turbo, so.
I've pushed this car around a little bit. He's pretty heavy.
Yes. And that's without a driver in it, you weigh 260.
260, yeah.
260. We're all Sasquatches around here, so just deal with it. All right, so I'm gonna turn it on and let it get situated.
Let it get calibrated. I see lights coming on.
They're all on.
So I like how the lights, it tells you, hey,
They're all on. Yep.
these are on, these are good to go.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yep, all 4 scales are on.
All right, here we go. I think we're there.
Alrighty. So, all right, all the weight is off, and I'm watching the scales, and the scale is not, weight is not moving.
I hear the car.
I hear the car is moving. So I'm seeing the corners moving, but the total is just kind of staying where it's at.
Okay.
So,
Where are we at?
see where we are. See if y'all can see where we are right here. And
So 3,300.
your car need to go on a diet.
Is it everything? 34.45. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty heavy.
34.45, and this thing cut a 630s, completely untuned, with a 134 60 foot, 134 60 foot, 630s, completely untuned suspension, and barely putting anything out of the starting line. Putting away all kind of daylight under the front tires. So yeah, we get this thing going that way instead of that way. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
All right.
now we know.
And the weight,
Is it moving at all, or is it?
the corners, every time it clicks and pops, the corners click, they move, but the total weight has actually creeped down 3 pounds.
Okay.
So, and this, I don't know if y'all can hear that or not, but the car is settling on it. So as it settles, every time it settles, the scales wiggle. So, yeah. So judging off that, from what I'm watching, when we roll it on the car, so we're going.
Yeah.
I was talking while it did it. I don't know if y'all heard that or not. So what we're going to do is, judging off this for the time period, it's lost weight about 4 pounds now in this short time period. So when we go to actually scaling this car properly, when we get all get the corner weights and doing all the measurements and everything, that's a noisy car. We will, it's a high joints, and the shocks,
Yeah.
the compression on them is slowly letting it push the weight down on it. So, but yeah, so we're gonna do this, and we get to get it back in there, measure all the things I want to measure. We'll talk about that. I'm doing other work on another video, and we'll come back and see how these scales work when we roll them on properly. So, see you in a few. All right, so y'all can see I got the car sitting here on the scales. When I first went to film this review on the scales, I wanted to be kind of an initial reaction and how the scales worked. I've done a lot of research on these scales, and for a budget scale, they seem to be pretty good. But upon actually using them myself, I found that they have some quirks about them that I really wanted to do more testing on the scales, so I could try to give them a fair shake when I was finishing up my review on these scales. So we've actually had a few different vehicles on these scales, and we've tested the scales driving on, as well as setting it on, jacking the car up and setting them on the scales. So I want to get into that, and we'll do it right here. All right, so my first thing I want to get into is actually driving on the scales versus lowering the car down on the scales. People do it different ways and have different reasons for doing it. I generally like to drive onto the scales because the suspension is loaded, but that has as many problems as lowering the car down on the scales does. If you're running a car that has, like if you're running a big tire car and you have like a 26-inch tall front tire and let's say a 32 or a 33-inch tall rear tire, well, that changes the size of your contact patch. So driving on the scales, you have to like factor in how far away to put your front scales versus your back scales to where when you drive onto the scales, they're sitting centered. These scales are very particular about where you place the weight on them. If you get the weight off of centered on these scales, they seem to have a lot of discrepancy on where the center is on them. Whereas some of your more high-end scales, they aren't as picky on center. So if you put them on and you don't have it centered on the scales, your weight can be off a pretty good bit. We actually at times are seeing, 60, 80 pound differences just by having the weight shifted around on the scales. So that's something to really think about. Now, if you're going to roll on the scales, you have to make sure that you have it centered. When you raise a car up and then set it down on the scales, as y'all saw earlier in this video, this is a noisy car, the heim joints and the way the shocks and stuff are on it. If you have, like on a drag car, you have a high compression setting on your shocks, and as the suspension is dropped out, when it goes to settle back down, the shocks are going to fight you. And it's going to take a minute for the weight to settle down on the scales. So you'll see the weights, and you'll watch them, the weights on the corner weights, as it settles and as it levels the car down, it will change your weights, and it can change the total, and definitely will change your corner weights. So you have to push on the car, wiggle it around to try to settle it down. But that way works just as well as rolling it on. It's just a personal preference. And coming from where I've used scales before, generally I've run cars with squared up tires. Circle track cars typically have the same size tires all the way around, and like four-wheel drive dirt drags, they have generally the same height tires in the classes that we ran. So driving on the scales, you line them up, drive them on, they work perfect that way. So it's either or, that's it is. But when I saw was doing research, I saw people having that problem. I tend to see it's more how you place the scale or the vehicle on the scale really tells it. So I think these are pretty good scales as far as the weight goes. So I don't know that that's a gripe or if that's just, these are budget scales. So you got to be accurate where you put the weight on. So that's the first point I want to make. My next thing to talk about is actually driving the car on the scales. Initially, I was nervous about driving these cars on the scales because when I set the scales down and pushed on it, it could tip the scale up. And I just slapping electronics that we spent that much money on the ground with a 3,500 pound car, 3,700 pound a driver, the thought of it tipping up and then slapping the electronics back down really made me nervous, and my buddies and stuff that was in the shop when we first started playing with these. So I cut some wood blocks to make little ramps to try to drive on it. But we have also tried it with just driving the car on the scales, and the difference is when you're just putting your hand weight and you're tipping it, yeah, you can tip because you're not forcing the scale down to where it flattens out as it drives on. So if you're really careful and try to be really controlled as it comes up, I have yet to see it slap the weight or try to tilt the scales up. But when you're backing off the scales, be very careful because that's when you're actually unloading the weight off of the scales. So as you unload it, it can come up, and if it comes up and tips, it could slap. But then it's, slapping its own weight, and that's just like you kind of dropping it down when you're sliding into the car. So just be really controlled as you roll off the scales. You probably won't have any problems with that, but I was really, really happy because I hadn't seen any reviews where people drove these cars on the scales, and I wanted to try it. So works for me. And I think I'm going to save the old 2x6s I cut up, save them, have them around here just in case we put something on here and don't want to feel too confident about climbing on these scales. We'll use it then. So I got one more gripe, and it's this control box is the biggest gripe. So let's get into that. All right, so this is the last thing I want to talk about these scales, and this is an actual gripe. The others is more of a preference. I like the scales. I think they're pretty nice. I like the fact that they come in a carrying case and you can use them. They seem pretty durable, and for the money, they seem great. But this control box, they can do better on this. This is where the problem lies, is in the control box. So from what I've seen so far using these scales, you have, in order to change, it has a bunch of different pages. You can check your corner cross weights, your front to rear bias, your left to right bias, all these great things that this control box has in it. And I mean, it holds a good signal. I can walk around this shop and not lose signal, which is a great thing. But the problem is trying to change the program to click to the next page, because you're having to press the function button, which changes from pounds to kilograms, or whatever the metric, kilograms I think it is. And so you have the function, pounds, kilograms, and the tare button. If you fat finger this and you press the tare button, you just zeroed your scales out, and you have to start all the way back over, back the car off the scales or raise it up, press tare again to re-zero your scales, and then go through the process of lining it back up, setting it down, setting the weight, and all of that. And there's a good reason why these are pretty sturdy control boxes, because I'm pretty sure some people has tossed these things because of these buttons. Matter of fact, when we first was testing this, James was looking at his control box and was actually trying to see what his front to rear bias was. He pressed it, fat fingered it, and it zeroed it out while he's sitting in the car, and he looks at me and goes, oops. We had to start over. So it's definitely a problem, because I mean, you literally have just buttons here. You have, power, tare, function, light. If they had put it just another button to change that, they would have been so much better on these scales. All right, so just to reiterate how aggravating this control box can be, as you can tell, it's got the weight on it. The car is sitting on the scales, so it's got the weight on it. And to change to the next page, so you have the total weight. Now, if I wanted to go to see front and rear bias, you press the function, which will go from pounds to kilograms. All right, so you go back to pounds, and you had to press the function and the tare, and it will change to the front and rear. All right, but it's in kilograms. So you had to go and see, just like that. It took a second for it to change over, because the buttons are kind of not very good. So if you actually mess up and you do this right here and go boop, you just zeroed the scales out. Start over. Back the scales off, back the car off the scales, press tare again, because it'll be a negative 3,500 pounds. Press tare, then pull it back on the scales, reset everything. So I just wanted to do that and do this. So back to the video. So overall, for the price, I think these scales are really nice. And if you're trying to step your game up to try to get more into racing and stuff like that, and up your performance goals, I think these scales are a great investment, but just be patient. And this is a lesson that I learned from my dad growing up, is sometimes the cheaper tool isn't necessarily gonna break so often, is that it tends to be that a cheaper tool or a lower budget tool is you have to do more work to make the tool work. A lot of times your more expensive, your more high-end tools, they got more bells and whistles, and they tend to do their job better to make your job easier. So if you don't have the big budget to buy the tools to make your job easier, sometimes you got to work a little harder, and stuff like this is just something you got to deal with. But for the money to be able to scale a car out, I am really happy with these scales, and I'm really excited to see long-term how well they hold up. So I hope y'all found this video helpful. I hope y'all enjoyed seeing this video. And if you did, make sure you leave a comment, leave a like, make sure you subscribe, so you can keep on seeing more product reviews like this right here at AllieCat Customs.